Do you remember the moment you knew? Not because somebody told you, but because you just knew that there were rules in your house that did not need to be written down? You felt them in the air the second you walked through the front door. You read them in the set of your grandmother's shoulders. You understood them the way you understood thunder. You didn't need to see the lightning to know something serious was coming. And if you grew up Black in America in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, maybe even into the 70s, those rules were not suggestions. They were a way of life. They were a code passed down not through textbooks, but through a look, a whisper, a hand on your shoulder, or sometimes the business end of a switch that your mama made you go cut yourself from the yard. Today I want to sit with you a while, pull up a chair, because I'm Mama Lou, and we're going back, all the way back to 25 of those old school rules every Black child knew in their bones not to break. Some of them will make you laugh. Some of them will make you close your eyes and see that kitchen, that living room, that front porch as clear as if it were yesterday. And some of them I think will remind you that those rules carried more wisdom than we gave them credit for. Let's start at the beginning. Rule number one, you did not speak unless spoken to when grown folks were talking. Now I want you to really sit with that one, because it was not about silence for silence's sake. Grown folks in your house had seen things, they had navigated a world that was not always kind to them. And when they sat down at that kitchen table or on that porch and started talking, really talking, what was passing between them was survival information, strategy, grief that didn't have anywhere else to go. And a child bursting into the middle of that was not just rude, it was a disruption of something sacred. You learned by listening, you learned what the adults were worried about, what they were planning, how they handled hard things, and you stored all of it away without even knowing you were doing it. The rule taught you to be still, and being still, it turns out, is how you learn the most important things. Rule number two, you did not call an adult by their first name. It was Miss Johnson. It was Mr. Williams. It was Aunt's sister, even if she wasn't your blood aunt, even if she was just the woman 3 houses down who watched you on Tuesdays. Every adult in the neighborhood had a title, and you used it always because respect wasn't something you performed for the people who had power over you. It was something you gave freely as a practice, as a habit, as a value you carried in your body. And when you said Miss So and so, you were saying, I see you, I know you're somebody. I know you have lived a life worth honoring. That was a whole theology packed into a title. Rule number three, you did not go outside looking any kind of way. Oh, this one right here. Your mama would stop you at the door, hand flat on the frame, and look you up and down with those eyes that could see everything wrong with you, from your collar to your shoes. And it was not about vanity. I want you to understand that. It was about armor. It was about the understanding passed down through generations that the world would make judgments about your worth before you opened your mouth. And you were going out there as a representative, not just of yourself, of your family, of your people. A pressed collar and clean shoes said, we have dignity here, we have standards, you cannot look at us and see anything less than that. That was the message, and your mama ironed it right into your clothes every single morning. Rule number four, you ate what was put in front of you. There was no short order cooking in your grandmother's kitchen, no special requests, no substitutions. If she made neck bones and rice, you ate neck bones and rice. If she made pinto beans and cornbread, you sat down and you were grateful. And I'll tell you why this rule was the way it was. Because some folks might hear it and think it was harsh. It wasn't harsh, it was honest. There were households, real households. Households you might have known, where what was on that table represented every dollar that could be stretched, every end of a pay period scraped together. To turn your nose up at that food was not just ingratitude, it was an insult to the labor and the love that produced it. You ate what was put in front of you because somebody worked hard to put it there, and you cleaned your plate, every bite. Rule number five, you went to church, period. It was not a discussion. It was not negotiable on the basis of how tired you were or whether you felt like it that particular Sunday. You were up, you were washed, you were dressed, and you were in that pew every Sunday. And I know some of you are smiling right now because you remember exactly what that felt like. The starched dress or the clip-on tie, the smell of your grandmother's powder, the way the whole church seemed to exhale when the organ started. Church was not just about religion for Black families in this country. It was the community center, it was the news network, it was the place where your people gathered and said, we are still here, we are still standing. Whatever the week brought, we are still here together. You went because you belonged to something larger than yourself, and the rule made sure you never forgot it. Rule number 6, you did not let the sun go down on an argument. I heard this one from my own grandmother, and she heard it from hers. Before you went to sleep at night, whatever was broken between people in that house, you fixed it, or at least you tried, because tomorrow was not promised to anybody. They knew that, Lord. They knew that in ways that younger generations are just now beginning to understand. You did not lay your head down with bitterness sitting in your chest if you had any choice in the matter. You said you're sorry. You gave your hug. You made your peace, and then you slept. That rule kept more families whole than any therapy session I've ever heard of. Rule number 7, you answered the phone properly. None of this picking up and just breathing into the receiver. None of this just saying yeah or what. You said, "Good afternoon, Johnson residents. This is Michael speaking," even if you were 8 years old, because the phone was a formal instrument in those days. It was a privilege. Not everybody had one, and you treated it accordingly. You answered with your family's name because your family's name was worth announcing, and whoever was on the other end heard immediately that this was a household that had standards. That rule, small as it sounds, was teaching you something enormous. How you present yourself to the world is a choice you make every single time. Rule number 8, you did not run in the house. Walk, slow down. This is not the street, this is not the yard. This is your home, and in your home you move with consideration for the people around you and the things around you. Because those things, that lamp, that end table, that figurine your grandmother brought from her own mother's house, those things represented sacrifice. They were not easily replaced. And beyond that, the home was a sanctuary. The pace of the home was different from the pace of the street because it had to be. Life outside could be fast and hard and unpredictable. In here you moved slow, in here you breathed. That was the lesson underneath the rule. The home is a different kind of place. Treat it that way. Rule number 9, you said grace before every meal, every single one, not just Sunday dinner, not just the big meals, every meal, even if it was just crackers and a glass of milk before bed. You paused, you bowed your head, you said thank you for what you had. And I think in the rush of modern life, we have lost something precious in the letting go of that habit, because the pause before the meal did something to the meal itself. It reminded you that food was not just fuel, it was provision, it was grace, literal grace, from something larger than your own effort. And around that table, when everybody bowed their heads at the same moment, you were reminded that you were a we, not just a collection of individuals grabbing what they could. You were a family, and the prayer was what said so. Rule number 10, you did not air your family's business in the street. Whatever happened in that house stayed in that house. You didn't go to school on Monday telling your friends that your parents had argued over the rent. You didn't tell the neighbors that your uncle was having troubles. You kept your family's story inside the family, where it belonged, where it could be tended to with love and honesty without becoming gossip, without becoming somebody else's entertainment. That rule was about dignity. It was about the understanding that not everyone who listens to your story is listening with your best interest at heart. Your grandmother knew who in the neighborhood would use your pain against you. She'd seen it done, and she made sure you kept certain things close. That is not a small wisdom, that is a survival skill. Rule number 11, you spoke to people when you walked in a room. You walked into your grandmother's house on a Sunday afternoon, and there were 12 people in that living room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, and you went to every single one of them and you spoke. You said hello, you gave a hug to the elders. You didn't slide in and go sit in a corner. You didn't wave from across the room. You made your rounds, the way your mother made her rounds, the way her mother made her rounds before her. Because acknowledging people is how you say, I see you, I'm glad you're here, you matter to me. And in a world that had spent a very long time telling Black people they were invisible, the act of truly seeing one another, of making the rounds, of speaking, was a quietly radical thing. Your grandmother knew that, even if she never said it in those exact words. Rule number 12, you did not waste food. Not a bite, not a crumb. The heel of the bread that nobody liked, you ate it. The pot liquor left at the bottom of the greens, you sopped it up with your cornbread. The bones from the chicken, they went into a pot with water and onion and became soup by Tuesday. Nothing left that kitchen as waste if there was any way it could become something. And if you've ever wondered why your grandmother's cooking tasted like it did, that depth, that richness, that something you can't quite name, It is partly because she used everything, all of it, the whole of a thing, not just the easy parts. There is a philosophy in that, and it is a profound one. The easy parts alone will not sustain you. You have to know how to use the whole thing. Rule number 13, you kept the house clean and you kept it clean on a schedule. Saturday was cleaning day in almost every Black household I have ever known. You got up early before any playing, before any television, before any of the things you wanted to do, and you cleaned, you swept, you mopped, you dusted the baseboards and the tops of the door frames that nobody else thought to look at. You cleaned the bathroom until it shone, and then and only then was the weekend yours. The why behind this rule was also about armor, the same armor as the pressed clothes. Because your home was your domain, and it said something about you, whether you wanted it to or not. A clean, ordered home said, "We respect ourselves here. We have pride here." And that pride was a shield that your grandmother carried every single day of her life. Rule number 14. You did not question your parents' decisions in front of other people. If you had something to say, you waited. You found the private moment. You said your piece quietly, respectfully, and within the walls of the family. You did not challenge your father in the driveway in front of the neighbors. You did not argue with your mother at the grocery store because the family unit was a unit, and it presented itself as one, even when it had cracks, even when there were disagreements, because a unified front was protection. Disunity was a vulnerability. Your elders understood this with a clarity that came from hard experience. Rule number 15, you wrote your thank you notes. You got a birthday gift from an aunt who lived across town, and before the week was out, you sat down with a piece of paper, not a phone, not a printed card with your name signed in it, but your hand and a pen and your own words, and you wrote that woman a letter thanking her. Your grandmother stood over you until it was done and done right, because gratitude expressed properly is a form of love, and love requires effort. The effort of the handwritten note was the point. It cost you something, your time, your attention, and that cost is what made it mean something to the person who received it. We have made gratitude so easy now that it has become almost meaningless. Your grandmother knew that long before anyone coined a word for it. Rule number 16, you went inside when the streetlights came on. This one needs no explaining to anyone who lived it. The streetlights were the clock. When those lights flickered on, you were supposed to already be heading toward the porch, because if you were not inside by the time they were fully lit, whatever was waiting for you inside was going to be significantly more unpleasant than the conversation you were trying to finish with your friends. And that rule, simple as it was, gave the evening back to the family. It said, the day is done, come home now, come back to us, the world gets you all day, we get you in the evenings, come home. Rule number 17. You did not sit down before your elders sat down at the table. At Sunday dinner, at holiday meals, at any gathering where food was served, the elders ate first, or at minimum, they were seated first. The oldest person in the room was honored with the first seat, the first plate, the first choice. This was not ceremony for ceremony's sake. This was the lived understanding that age had earned something, that the oldest people in your family had carried the most, had seen the most, had survived the most, and that their comfort was the first obligation of everyone around them. We have, and I'll say this plainly, we have largely lost this practice, and I believe we are poorer for it. Rule number 18, you shook hands with a firm grip and looked the person in the eye. Your grandfather or your uncle would take your hand and hold it and say, "Look at me when you shake my hand." Because a weak handshake said something about you that you didn't want said. It suggested uncertainty, apology, a kind of smallness, and they were not raising you to be small. You were going out into a world that was going to try in 1,000 ways, large and small, to make you feel like you were less than, and you would not give it any help. You shook hands like you meant it. You looked people in the eye like you had every right to be in the room because you did. And the handshake was the first sentence of every introduction, and they made sure it was a good one. Rule number 19. You did not borrow what you could not return. If your neighbor lent you a cup of sugar, you returned a cup of sugar and then some. If somebody lent you money, you paid it back before you paid anything else, because your word was the only currency that couldn't be taken from you. And your reputation for honoring your debts was something you built over years and could lose in a single broken promise. The community depended on people being able to rely on each other when the bank wasn't lending to Black families, when the systems that were supposed to help were not helping. The community was the safety net. And a safety net only holds if every thread is trustworthy. You were one of the threads. Act like it, rule number 20. You did not disrespect your grandmother's house in any way, not so much as tracking mud across her clean floor. There are some of you listening to me right now who can still feel the particular terror of seeing the expression on your grandmother's face when you forgot yourself and ran across her clean kitchen floor with your shoes still on. It was not just about the floor, it was about what that floor represented. She had waxed it herself, on her knees, with her hands, because that floor was hers, maybe one of the few spaces in the world that was entirely hers to command, and it was going to be maintained the way she said it was going to be maintained, full stop. Her house was her sovereignty, and you respected it the way you would respect any sovereign territory, which is to say, you followed the rules the moment you crossed the threshold. Rule number 21, you read. And then you read some more. Education in Black households of earlier generations was not treated as a privilege or a suggestion. It was treated as the primary mechanism of liberation, because that is exactly what it had been. Literally, there were not many generations between the Black children of the 1950s and the Black children who had been enslaved and legally prohibited from learning to read. The memory of that prohibition was not abstract. It was living memory for many grandmothers and great-grandmothers. And so you read because reading was a radical act. You read because knowing was power that nobody could confiscate from you. You read because your people had bled for the right to do it, and you would not waste that right lying on a couch watching television when there were books in this house. Rule number 22. You did not use ugly language in the house, and you thought carefully before using it anywhere. Words meant something. The words you chose said something about who you were and where you came from and what kind of person you intended to be. Your grandmother might not have been able to articulate it in those terms, but she felt it with her whole being, which is why the moment certain words came out of your mouth in her vicinity, something happened to the temperature in the room that had nothing to do with the weather. Language was character, and character was the thing that outlasted everything else. Every reversal, every disappointment, every season of hardship. What you said and how you said it was who you were in the world. She needed you to understand that, and the rule made sure you did. Rule number 23, you helped without being asked. You saw your grandmother struggling with a heavy pot. You got up and you helped her with the pot. You didn't wait to be asked. You didn't keep watching television and expect someone to call your name. You saw the need and you moved toward it. That was the expectation, not that you were obedient when directed, but that you were attentive enough to see what needed doing and generous enough to do it without needing to be prompted. That is a much higher standard than just following instructions. That is the standard of someone who is genuinely present in the lives of the people around them, someone who sees and who acts. That was the person they were building when they raised you. That's still the kind of person the world needs. Rule number 24. You did not put grown folks' business in the street, and you especially did not lie to protect yourself. Now, this one has two layers, so stay with me. You already know you didn't talk about family business outside the home. But this rule also went inward. When something happened and your parent or grandparent asked you directly, not accusingly, just directly, you told the truth, because the lie was always discovered. They had eyes in the back of their heads and sources you never knew about, and an intuition built from decades of reading people in situations where reading people wrong could cost them dearly, and the punishment for the thing you did was always lighter than the punishment for lying about it. Always, the lie said, I don't trust you enough to tell you the truth. And that was a wound that took far longer to heal than whatever mischief you'd gotten into in the first place. Rule number 25, you carried yourself like you were somebody because you were. And this is the one I want to leave you with, because all the other 24 rules were really just different expressions of this one. Walk like you have somewhere to be. Speak like what you have to say matters. Sit in a room like you have every right to be in it because you do. Your grandmother did not send you out into the world looking pressed and clean and mannered and educated for nothing. She was putting armor on you. She was handing you tools. She was saying in every way she knew how to say it without always having the words, you come from something real. You come from people who survived the unsurvivable and made beauty out of almost nothing and kept their dignity in conditions designed to strip it away. And you will walk through this world knowing that you will not give any part of this world permission to make you small. That was the rule. That was the rule underneath every rule. I think about the women and men who made those rules. I think about what they had seen and what they had survived and what they were trying to build in the middle of all of it. They were building you, they were building the kind of person who could navigate a world that was complicated and sometimes cruel with grace and intelligence and dignity intact. And those 25 rules, said out loud or never said at all, just lived and breathed and modeled every single day, were the architecture of that building. Now I know that not every rule was perfect. I know that some of what was passed down carried the anxiety and the trauma of the times, and that some of it needed to evolve as the world did. That is true, and it is fair to say so. But I also know this, there is something that was in those households, in that way of raising children, that a lot of us are quietly grieving the loss of, a sense of being held to something, a sense of belonging to something, a sense that the way you moved through the world reflected on the people who loved you. And that was not a burden, it was a gift. It meant you were connected, it meant you were not alone. You were never alone. Do you remember, really remember, sitting in your grandmother's kitchen on a Saturday morning, watching her move between the stove and the counter, the smell of something good already deep in the air, even though it was only 9 o'clock, and feeling without being able to name it absolutely safe, absolutely known? That feeling was not an accident. That feeling was built. Rule by rule, meal by meal, Sunday by Sunday. It was built by the hands and the will and the love of people who had every reason to despair and chose over and over to build instead. I hope you remember them today. I hope you feel them close. And if you have young people in your life, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, the neighbor's kid who needs somebody to look up to, I hope you'll pass some of this on. Not all of it has to be passed on the same way it was given to you. But the heart of it, the dignity, the gratitude, the care for one another, the sense that how you carry yourself in the world is a choice you make and a legacy you leave, that part. That part is worth holding on to. That part is worth everything. Thank you for sitting with me today. Thank you for remembering alongside me. I'm Mama Lou, and I'll see you next time.